Hi everybody, this is Steph Unthank here from Infinity Wellness, and I'm joined again today by my colleague and friend Jen McDiarmid. It's really good to see you again. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I am enjoying the fact that the weather is a bit warmer.
It's getting that, although it's absolutely freezing here.
Oh.
Yeah. It was really nice yesterday, and I've looked in, it's like autumn's on its way, but hopefully.
Oh, bless you. I'm so sorry. I feel really bad. The thing is, it's really grey. I've got to be honest, it is really grey. It's wet, but it's still about 18 degrees, so it's still got that kind of sense of warmth at least.
Yeah.
And that does me. As long as it's got warmth, I'm not freezing. Oh, bless you. I'm so sorry that you're a bit cold.
I'll forgive you.
I've really enjoyed doing the first one or two video casts that we've done, Jen. So thanks so much for taking the time on those. And I wanted to continue our conversation today around the menopause particularly, and this is the third of three that we're going to be talking about, menopause as a subject. In the first two, obviously for those that have watched, and if you haven't, male and female, I encourage anybody to go and watch these. Jen gave us some amazing insight around menopause and nutrition, and the link between the two, and how we can really support ourselves as women when it comes to eating and doing the right things around our nutritional health. So we're going to just continue with the menopause, but we're just going to flip slightly today, just for a few minutes, and look at the menopause and good mental health. And I guess particularly, there's kind of three things that I just want to pick out to start with. Is when we think about our health holistically, I kind of always talk about and come to conversations in terms of emotional well-being and what we can do around emotional well-being to support ourselves, physical well-being, and again the same, what are we doing, you know, to support our physical well-being and nurture that, and then finally psychological well-being. And when we talk about mental health, I think this is really interesting for me. There's been a huge amount, as we know, through COVID particularly, of dialogue and conversation and press coverage and social media around mental health. But I think it's really important that we put the word good at the front of it. Good mental health. You know, what is useful for good mental health? Because I think what's happened is we've now started to see the phrase mental health as bad mental health all the time. But we've become quite reactive to that. In terms of, I guess, from a societal perspective, it seems to be that we're spending a lot more time trying to cure rather than prevent. So it's really important that when we talk about mental health, we talk about it as good mental health. Yeah. So I just want to kind of point that out for the audience. But so when I talk about emotional well-being, I guess I'm thinking about, you know, what's going on for us emotionally, you know, how we're feeling. Sometimes talk about it in the heart, right? What does it feel like in my heart? So, you know, am I angry? Am I sad? Am I upset? Am I tearful? And then from a more physical perspective, what's going on for me in my body? So, you know, whether that's aches and pains, muscle, bone, tension, ability to relax and kind of let things go. Where am I carrying the kind of physicalness in my body? And then psychologically, obviously, for maybe not obvious for many, but psychologically, what's going on around inner chatter, negative self-talk, rumination, worry, concern, thinking about the past, thinking about the future, all of that kind of stuff. So I think when we look at menopause in the round, a lot is changing, isn't it, Jen? You know, we've talked about nutrition and the body, but we have to have an appreciation, I think, for the fact that a lot is changing. And from a mental health perspective, a mind health perspective, we might notice or experience, I don't know, kind of minor, let's say, anxiety attacks, bouts of anxiety attacks starting to come up for us. It could be that we are developing panic attacks for the first time. That's never happened before. And it might even be that we've got some type of menopausal depression that is starting to develop. So when we think about mental health from a perspective of the menopause, there's a lot to be aware of, conscious of, maybe even look out for. And I'll talk later on about some of the things that we can put in place to steer away from it and support ourselves. But we talked about this earlier. Hormones play a massive part, don't they?
Huge part, absolutely. And I don't think people always realize what an impact hormone changes can have on our mental health.
So, and I think that we don't, you're right, they have a massive impact. We don't realize, and we're not very educated, I don't think, around hormones. Do you think that?
Oh, completely. And when we think about menopausal changes, I think it's only in the recent years that people have started to talk about how it impacts our mental health. And before, the focus has always been on about physical changes that can happen, whether it's hot flushes, changes in menstrual cycles, but there hasn't been much attention given to the impact it has on our mental health. And it can be really huge. And for lots of people who maybe don't understand it, can really be challenging, where they don't know why it's happening or why they're suddenly starting to get the anxiety attacks, like you said, or starting to feel low because they haven't quite joined up the pieces, especially if you're perimenopausal. Those emotional aspects can come in before really your menstrual changes have even had much of a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think that when we think about hormones, like as we've just said, and given what you've just said, there needs to be a bit more awareness around how hormones really affect the body. And we talk about mental health in terms of stress and anxiety and depression, but we don't necessarily talk about the way that the body's made up and the way that hormones actually have a big part to play in the way that we're feeling, behaving, acting. And equally, I think as well, because hormones play such a big part in our lives, in our bodies, in our mental health, physical health, emotional health as well, is that they're not only related just to stress and all things related to stress, but they're also related to digestion. They're also related to our body. So as we're going through the menopause, we'll notice our body moving differently. Things may become more difficult, but then the shape of our body as well. Anybody going through the menopause, any woman going through the menopause, in the menopause, post-menopause, will absolutely notice a change in the way that their body looks. And what that does to our mental health, we really need to consider that, right? And prepare ourselves for that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was interested in a study by a website called Everyday Health. They do quite a lot of different studies around different aspects of just human existence, human well-being. And one of the studies that they've done recently that really, really kind of took me was a piece around how women in their 20s and 30s need to be particularly mindful of stress, because as we approach perimenopause, and I'm being very generalistic here because I know it is different for many women, but let's say perimenopause is like late 30s, early 40s. As we approach perimenopause, if we've led a continuously stressed out life, so high stress, chronic stress, or even burnout, we're starting to now see evidence coming through that is saying women in that space are more likely or more prone to, let's say, go through the menopause earlier. So it's early days, and some of these studies are really early in terms of some of the findings. But when I think about two things here: mental health pre-menopause, right? So, and I'm not talking about perimenopause, I'm talking about pre-menopause. So from that the moment in our lives as young adults where the world starts to get a bit serious. Right, and we're not as footloose and fancy free about, I saw a young adult the other day, probably I remember this, it was at the weekend, maybe 11 years old, and when I watched their behavior, it was a girl, but when I watched her behavior, I thought she still came across as being quite free. Sadly, the thing that struck me was, I wonder when that will change.
It's scary, and it seems to be changing earlier and earlier, doesn't it?
It really does. So if it's changing earlier and we're starting to become under pressure more and more at an earlier age, mental health, in terms of good mental health, is really, really important from such an early age. And I appreciate it's important before the age of 11 as well. So what we do in that build up through our adult life is so important. If for instance we don't want to end up in that high stress, high fatigue, chronic stress, even burnout zone. Therefore, if there's some ground in this study, if there's some real evidence in this study, not bringing on the menopause earlier. So I just thought that was really interesting by Everyday Health.
Definitely.
Yeah, and then we were talking, weren't we? And it'd be really good to get your view on this. And I know that we've talked a bit about this from a nutritional perspective, and it'd be great to get your view and pull that into this conversation today around mental health and good mental health and the menopause. But we were talking about some of the simple things that we can do as women to really support ourselves and nurture that sense of well-being as we come up to that sort of perimenopause moment in our lives. And so some of the things that I was kind of looking at to start with, that I know we talk about a lot, Jen, but exercise.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Exercise is really important for so many different things. But if we're thinking about from like a mental health point of view, obviously, if you do exercise, especially appropriate exercise where you're not trying to, again, beat yourself up and push yourself to the extreme 7 days a week, it really helps release all of the endorphins, all of the feel-good hormones, the serotonin. But actually, when we're thinking about exercise, we've got something called the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
And that's something that's really, really important. And lots of us don't stimulate this vagus nerve very well, because if we're thinking about stress, if we're thinking about being one of those stressed people at burnout, you're probably spending a lot of time at the computer, potentially, you're sort of hunched over. And when we breathe, when we don't really think about how we're breathing, we actually breathe in a very shallow way. We're not normally breathing into our chest, not really deep down where we need to. And actually, if we sit up straight and we really start to focus on our breathing, even if it's just for 10 minutes a day, what we do is we really stimulate this thing called the vagus nerve. So we start to get loads of energy going into our gut, start to get, lots of stimulation, oxygenation going around the body, which really helps with digestion, and then will really help with mental health, because actually we produce over 70% of our serotonin, which is our feel-good hormone, in our guts. So the more we focus on breathing through exercise, the more we're naturally going to support digestion and support our mental health as well.
Yeah. I wonder how many women watching this, or men, have gone, I just did, when you said about sitting up straight and being able to get the air to flow.
Absolutely. My little girl's in the background and she's doing exactly the same now that I'm saying it as well.
Yeah, it's so important, isn't it? And so we talk, I mean, exercise is great from a perspective, as you've just talked about, in terms of this connection to the vagus nerve and that generation of endorphins and serotonin particularly, but also when we exercise as well, we're looking after our body. I'm not even talking about lifting heavy weights or being able to run 5k in less than 30. It's not about that striving, goal driven, objective driven exercise, but just to know that as our lives begin to change, sort of from 40 onwards, things change in our body as well, so muscle wastage and early signs of things like osteoporosis, and I know that diet can really support that, but exercise, being able to really kind of nurture the muscle in our bodies and look after the body structure, I think is really important. Exercise can really help that.
Absolutely.
And then eating well, obviously, we've spoken about, haven't we, for the last couple of sessions that we've done together in these video casts. So if anybody's watching this and they want to go back and watch those again, and Jen gives some amazing tips around eating well through in and post menopause, walking, just being outdoors in nature, using those muscles, standing up straight, taking in the breath, and not necessarily having to do anything vigorous, but just walking generally, and talking. Right, look what we're doing. Just talking to each other. And
definitely. And if it's talking can be brilliant, especially with stress. Sometimes, and they sort of call it like the placebo effect, or they call it like the sugar pill, where actually if people can see anybody or speak to anybody, even though there's no solution at the end of it, potentially, actually just having somebody listen to you can really reduce down your stress levels. And if we think about being perimenopausal, menopausal, we've got so much more burden on our adrenal glands than we ever normally would do, which is why you can start to get more anxiety and depression. And it's because when our ovaries start to decline how much estrogen is being produced, your body will go to your adrenal glands as it's like backup manufacturing site for it. So actually, if we don't look after our stress levels and we don't support what's going on through things like talking, we just get more burden on our adrenal glands. And then when that happens, your body then starts to create fat cells, because that's its final place to make hormones, which is why we can start to notice this body changing. So talking can actually support you physically and emotionally, surprisingly, when you're going through the menopause. It's huge.
Just amazing, isn't it? When you think about that piece around the adrenal glands, it's just amazing that you can link having a really good conversation with somebody to reduce your stress level, will support the amount of stress, as you say, and the way that the adrenal glands are functioning. If they're not functioning properly, they're going to produce more fat. That changes the shape of your body. The whole chain of events, in a really kind of simple way to understand, is just mind-blowing, isn't it?
Totally. And then you relax because you've spoken. So you breathe a bit better. You're not doing the fight or flight breathing, which then supports the gut health, which then supports emotional well-being as well. It's all intrinsically linked. Our well-being from an emotional point of view and good mental health is really supported by good physical health. So I think when we look at mental health, especially through the menopause, it really is thinking about good physical health, or just talking and breathing can make such a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. It's two simple things, right? Talk and breathe.
Absolutely.
And try and allow that breath to flow through the body.
Definitely.
Yeah, so I guess the only other things I wanted to mention really is we talked about exercise, eating well, walking and talking together, even better. We talked about this before, but avoiding, where we can, avoiding caffeine and alcohol.
Yeah.
You know, caffeine and alcohol particularly does two things, doesn't it? Not great for the body, you know, no real nutritional value. But alcohol also can have quite an impact on our mental health in terms of it not being so good because of the places we go to when we're drinking, you know, that kind of unconscious state that we get into, and then how we feel the next day when we get up, and all that negative self-talk that's going on. So being a bit mindful of that, I think, in perimenopause, menopause, postmenopausal as well. Sleep, you know, making sure that we're getting the sleep that we need, and if we're sleep deprived, then what can we do to help our minds and our bodies relax, and what you talked about earlier in the vagus nerve, and how that connects with that kind of mind body connection is so important, isn't it?
Absolutely, definitely. And sleep can get really impaired during the menopause with hot flushes, with anxieties arising in the middle of the night. So I think we talked quite a lot in the second video about different food groups and things that you can look at from looking at your vitamin D, your omega-3. So actually, if you're having trouble sleeping, maybe by doing some of those elements coming in from a nutritional point of view can really support that good night's sleep. So then you wake up feeling less stressed and more able to cope. So otherwise it becomes a vicious cycle of one feeding into the other when it comes to sleep.
Yeah, spot on, absolutely. Yeah, another reason to go back and watch the other video cast, I think, just a little reminder there. And then pampering, right? We've got to pamper ourselves a little bit, and, you know, look after ourselves, make ourselves feel good, you know. So lots of things that we can do to just self-care and kind of pamper ourselves and bring those things to our kind of daily routine. And then finally, and really importantly, is just remembering to smile.
Yeah.
And to just take some joy from some of the small things in life. You know, in a lot of the teaching I do, I talk a lot about the fact that in this Western modern world that we live in, we do hanker after very big symbolic moments to help ourselves feel really kind of good and connected to life, but we really don't need to. And some really small things, you know, I get so much joy, Jen, from just talking to you. I really do. It makes my day. We have these sessions and we have these discussions, and I get some joy out of drinking something like a really cold glass of squash, you know, or going outdoors and I'm looking at my vegetables from the door from here and how well that my courgettes have really coming along now, you know. But these little things that we can look at and just take some joy from and smile about, that again helps those changes in the body, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it does. And it can take a little while to sort of almost retrain your brain to remember those things. Like you said, otherwise we're always looking at what can we book in, what can we have to look forward to? And it's always got to be this big end goal, which then ultimately, if it doesn't work out the way you think, you end up being disappointed. But it's really actually a case of just appreciating what's in front of you and actually how positive that can make you feel. And then the more we think about that, the more your brain gets trained that way. And then the more positive you feel overall.
Yeah, it just takes practice, doesn't it, to try and do these little things each day. And I think just in that whole list of things that we talked about, do you know, the thing for me that really stands out that I just want to close on, if this is okay, is that when we try to just do tiny moments in our day of, you know, whether it's exercise, eating well, walking and talking with others, you know, avoiding caffeine, trying to avoid alcohol, getting that sleep. If you feel like you need a nap, have a nap if you can, and, you know, relaxing and pampering ourselves and smiling at some of those small things in life. The great thing for me is that when we can do that, and as you say, it's important to practice doing that, because you're not going to be able to do all of it at the same time together and start today. You know, it's not about making that list, is it, of actions. It's about starting small and building them in, and we talked about that over the last couple of video casts as well. But the big thing for me is it's all of those things that will eventually help you to avoid, right, professional help. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, you know. I give professional help, right, but I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But when we do all of these things, professional help, but also medication, you know, and if we can do all of these things and build these small things into our lives over time, you know, we're going to be in a much stronger place, aren't we, but be much more resilient and be able to cope better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we will. It's because we're really helping our body do what it really inherently wants to do, and that is to be in balance. And there's sometimes where the body can't get into balance, whatever we try, in which case medication might be the option, and that's
Absolutely.
absolutely fine. But there is maybe people out there that maybe don't need to have the medication, and actually making some of these changes will prevent that happening, because they are enough to help your particular body to feel balanced and to feel stronger.
Yeah, I love that. What a brilliant way to finish that piece around the body just wants to be in balance. So how
Yeah.
do we support that to happen and shape up in the way that just helps us a bit, right? Helps us to feel good and connected to our bodies, our minds, and our lives. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, thanks so much, Jen. Really brilliant conversation again today. I really hope that people watching this take something from it. And yeah, don't forget, you'll be able to see this through LinkedIn, the short part of it anyway. But then go to the YouTube and subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe so you can see mine and Jen's material coming up as and when it does. And to comment and share it with others, because it will be really useful for other people, I'm sure. Thanks so much for your time, Jen.
Thanks, Steph.
Really useful.
Thank you.